Good morning, everyone. So happy to see everyone. My name is Hannah Block, and I am the founder and executive director of Restoring Dignity. Welcome to the results presentation of Omaha's Refugee Housing Planning Study. Woo! This has been a long time in the making. 12 years ago, Restoring Dignity started as an all-volunteer run charity. We provided home makeovers to refugee families going through heartbreaking hardships after coming to America. During those first home makeovers, I remember seeing living conditions that were difficult to stomach. It is very hard to forget the first collapsed ceiling that you see. Or when you see families living in such horrific infestations that were present long before they had ever moved into their house or apartment. I can't unsee the hundreds of cockroaches crawling on walls, or the bites lining the arms of a little girl who couldn't sleep at night because bed bugs were feasting on her for hours on end. I'll never forget walking into an apartment that was covered in black mold from floor to ceiling. The mold was so thick, you could taste it in your mouth. There was a baby and an 80-year-old grandpa living there, breathing in that harmful air. And then there was the family who had no hot water for 5 months. Over the years, we have continued to see refugee families struggling with their housing in so many ways. We have probably heard from every refugee caseworker in the city about housing issues, and not just repair-related situations, but a whole host of problems. These problems continue to plague the families that we serve. We have watched for years as our resettlement agencies have only had enough funding from the federal government to provide 90 days of support to brand new resettled families. 90 days of support. Imagine, if you will, having to abandon your home due to impending genocide or war, then run for weeks or months across a country or multiple countries, live in a refugee camp for years or even decades, and then you finally get a chance at a life in another country, only to find out that you have to be completely self-sufficient within 3 months. And you don't speak or read the language of that country. For years, agencies across Omaha have been busy developing critical and innovative programs to serve our amazing refugee neighbors. Restoring Dignity created our Welcome Home education program, where we teach how to acclimate to housing in America. And over a dozen other agencies provide crucial support in other ways. Between all of our agencies, we have probably had over 100 conversations about how the situation surrounding housing must be improved. Up until this point, though, none of us had a roadmap forward or any certain set of data to show what was specifically needed. So last year, Restoring Dignity approached the housing-focused philanthropic team at Front Porch Investments, and we presented an idea. Our idea was to conduct a citywide refugee housing planning study to hear from refugees themselves, refugee service providers, and landlords about their experiences and about how things could be improved. Front Porch graciously agreed to fund the study. This allowed us to hire Wilder Research, a team from Minnesota with over 100 years of experience in conducting housing studies. And here we are, 1 year later, ready to share the results of this study that is full of solutions. Before we begin the presentation, I want to thank several important groups for being here. We have elected officials and their representatives present, in person and online. Can you please type your name in the webinar chat or stand and be recognized? I also want to recognize the many people who made this study possible. Front Porch Investments, the amazing refugee community leaders, refugee community members, refugee service providers, and landlords who participated in the study. Can you please type your name in the webinar chat or stand and be recognized? There's a lot of you in here, so stand up, be recognized, you participated. I also want to thank the Wilder research team. They have been wonderful to work with, and we couldn't be happier with the results that they are going to present today. And finally, I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you for being in attendance at this presentation today. Seriously, if you are sitting here listening to this, it means you are here to be part of the solution. And there are solutions. Together, we can improve housing circumstances for our newest neighbors in Omaha. We are moments away from hearing from Wilder Research, but first, a few housekeeping tips. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation, so please hold your questions till the end. Additionally, we have printed the full report that our staff will be handing out after the presentation. It's about 50 pages long, takes about an hour and a half to read. And if you'd like to read it, we'd encourage you to take a copy. We also have a one-page summary with solutions that we'll be handing out as well. And we would encourage everyone to take one as you leave and to read through it. And with that, I will direct your attention to the incredible Wilder research team.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Hannah, for such a warm welcome. And thank you for everyone for being here today. We're from Wilder Research, and before we get started, we're gonna go through kind of the logistics, which is the agenda. So firstly, we're gonna do introductions. We're gonna introduce each of us, the scope of refugee resettlement in the US and Omaha, the study background, the housing barriers, potential solutions, and like Hannah says, question and discussion time. So this is our team. We are a team of 4. One of our colleagues wasn't able to attend today, but my name is Naamilia. I use pronouns like she, her. I am a research associate at Wilder. I've been at Wilder for almost 2 years. And before that, I was actually in college. So this is my first big girl job. This is what I like calling. And I am a child of immigrants, so both my parents came from the border of Thailand and Burma. So I want to give back to the community and make sure that our voices are heard. And I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'm Jennifer McCleary. I'm a research manager at Wilder Research. I've been there for about 2 years, and prior to that, I was a professor in a department of social work, where my research focused on working with newly arriving refugee communities around substance use and mental health, and really working with communities to push back against systems that weren't made for them, aren't culturally or linguistically relevant. And so it was really exciting to be able to apply some of that experience to this project.
And hi, everyone. My name is Annie Lee. I am a research associate at Wilder, and I have been there for about 5 years. I primarily work on a social indicators project where we look at social and demographic trends and data over time. My interests are in like the intersections of public health and housing. So really was really interested in coming onto this project, and I'm super excited to share the results with you today.
Alrighty, so let's get started. So what is a refugee? There are many definitions, and this is what we're going to use for our research. A refugee is a foreign-born individual who is compelled to seek refuge in another country based on a well-founded fear of being persecuted in the country of their nationality for reasons of race, religion, social group, or political opinion. Altogether, there are 120 million people who are currently forcibly displaced in their homes. This is the highest number ever. This is due to wars like Syria and Ukraine, but also conflicts that have lasted generations. there are around 75% of refugees who are living in low income countries right now. And of those 120 million, only 43.5 million are considered officially as refugees. And they're really young as well. 74% are under the age of 35, while 44% are under the age of 18. And the UN has 3 options for refugee. First one, return to the country of origin. And this almost never happens because of protracted conflicts. 2, integration into a country of refuge. And this almost never happens again because most host countries are low income and unable to absorb many thousands of refugees. And the third one, resettlement. And only 1% of refugees resettle each year. United States is second in refugee resettlement. It's behind Canada. So more than 600,000 people have resettled in the United States since 2010. The number of refugees resettled to the US is determined by presidential administrations who set cap. So it varies year to year with a low of 11,000 in 2021 due to COVID and also immigration restriction with a high of 140,000 in the 90s. And in the fiscal year 2025, the United States plans to resettle 125 refugees, which is the highest number in almost 30 years. Where do most refugees in the US come from? So in 2024, the US resettlement program will prioritize resettling people from Burma and Africa, like Congo, Sudan, and South Sudan. The United States is also prioritizing people from Afghanistan and Ukraine, given the current conflicts of these countries. The United States has settled 117,000 Afghan natives through the Special Immigrant Visa Program and 271 Ukrainian refugees since the Russian invasion. So quiz time for the audience. True or false? Nebraska ranks among one of the top 10 states with the largest numbers of refugee arrivals. True. Wow, that was very fast. Okay. And well, it is true. So compared to other states, Nebraska has the highest number of refugee arrivals per capita. And while Nebraska only receives around 2% of refugee arrivals to the United States annually, it receives more refugees per capita than any other state. So the number of refugees in Nebraska is rising. So this is from the Refugee Empowerment Center. In 2022, they had 300 refugees. In 2024, they anticipate 1,850. And in 2025, they anticipate 1,975. This is because of family reunification, high number of jobs, and relatively low cost of living. Currently, there are 54,000 jobs open, and 39 workers are equal to 100 open jobs. Another quiz time for you guys. Since October 2023, where are the most refugees in Omaha resettling from? Does anyone have a guess? I can't hear, sorry. Okay. Well, here are the numbers. These are the top 6. So the first one is Syria with 243, Congo 182, Afghanistan 154, Burma with 128, Republic of South Sudan 95, and Somalia with 75. I also want to note this does not include humanitarian parolees and special immigrant visa programs. So the Ukrainians in Afghanistan, there's probably more numbers because these are the quote unquote official refugee numbers, it's not. So. Next thing I want to talk about is the resettlement at a glance. This is pretty blurry for you guys, so I'm just going to run through it and summarize it. So refugees go through a lengthy vetting process before coming to the US and are matched with resettlement agency. They don't get to choose where they go. Agencies get a call from a newly arriving family between 2 hours and 2 weeks prior to their arrival. They find an apartment, furnish the apartment, grocery shop for the first couple of days, and pick up the family at the airport and settle them to their new house. Agencies provide 90 days of services, including arranging job interviews, enrolling kids in school, ESL, and learning US culture. And then after that, those individuals rely on ethnic community-based organization, social service agencies, and friends and family. For background, I wanted to talk about financial support and costs for family of four. So these are all the numbers of family of four. So resettlement support, for resettling funds, they get 5,300. So each person gets around 1,325 paid to the resettlement agency. They use it for the first and last month of rent, groceries, and etc. And the rest goes to the family. And if they qualified, refugees also get TNAF, which is temporary assistance for needy families, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and Medicaid. And then they also get ESL classes, employment support, and general acclimation for 90 days. On the other side, it is the cost. So the deposit is 2,340. Rent for a 2-bed average is 1,170 a month. Transportation, 55 a month, and plane ticket loan, which is 3,600. However, I just want to say that this slide is just a family of four, but many families resettling in Omaha are much larger, 7, 9, or even 12 members of family members. So in order to deal with the cost of living in Omaha, stable housing is really important and the foundation of having a livable waging job, getting transportation, and keeping kids happy and stable. So that's the end of the resettlement background information, and I'm going to pass it now to Annie with our study background and results.
Thanks, now, Amelia. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we did our housing study. So we did 3 different methods. So first was a review of current literature. And this was a review of articles and reports about housing for people with refugee status. These studies included academic research as well as government and non-governmental organization reports and covered topics including barriers to securing affordable housing for refugees, policy context of resettlement and housing, and also case studies of successful housing interventions across the US. Next, we also conducted a landscape analysis, which we searched across publicly available data sources to look at what current housing and quality of life conditions are in Omaha for everyone in general. We also looked at refugee housing placement data and service provisions data from nonprofits. And we were able to map these onto a map with the help of MAPA to help us visualize what this data is playing out to look like. And then finally, we conducted interviews and focus groups with 3 key stakeholder groups. The first were interviews and focus groups with community members and leaders from the refugee communities. We conducted interviews with refugee serving organizations. And then finally, we did interviews with landlords and property managers. So a couple results from the literature review. Of course, you can read more in the report. We scanned over 90 articles and reports that reviewed housing for people with refugee status. And some of the things that we found were that like many Americans, refugees often face significant barriers to securing safe, affordable, and adequate housing. However, refugees' experiences with the housing market are exacerbated by things like language barriers, difficulty finding livable wage employment, and histories of trauma prior to resettlement. In the US, stable and affordable housing is in short supply. When rental housing is available, it is often unsuitable for larger families, is unsafe or unhealthy to live in, or can be very expensive. Several significant barriers to safe, stable, and affordable housing for refugees included the high cost of housing, both for those that are renting and those that are purchasing, limited availability of safe and affordable housing that is also close to amenities like schools, grocery stores, and public transportation, substandard housing conditions in rental units and housing units, language barriers and discrimination from landlords, and then also lack of targeted resources and support for refugees around housing issues. Some key points from our landscape analysis. Omaha is a city that attracts many people. It has a very vibrant community. About 29% of residents in Omaha are people of color. About 11% of residents in Omaha are born outside of the US. Omaha residents tend to be younger. About 86% are 65 or younger or our working age population. About 39% are have a bachelor's degree or higher, and 70% of the population is working. So there's a great number of people who are educated, working, contributing to Omaha. The next thing that we noted is that the rent unit size and availability in Omaha is similar to other comparable sized cities in the US that are also welcoming a lot of refugees. But we do see that there is a mismatch between what might be needed for refugees and what is available and affordable in Omaha for housing. For example, depending on the size of the family that needs to be resettled, refugees may require housing with more bedrooms. Housing units with 4 or more bedroom units only make up 21% of available rental units. And the average number of bedrooms for refugees in households being resettled is about 2.4. So just showcasing a few of the maps that we had created from us. The first is using zip code level data provided by nonprofits. About 11 nonprofits provided data across 4 years. We see that there are more households that are using services, and there's specific concentrations of where people are using services and where they're located. Kind of in this northern part of Omaha here. I've also highlighted 3 zip code areas in which this is data coming from REC showing zip codes that have consistently been having high numbers of refugee placements over the last 5 years. When we zoom into these zip codes, specifically 61834, 68104, and 68111, it's kind of crowded, so I'm going to walk you through. We see that school locations are these blue dots, and these orange lines are where public transportation lines are. While some schools do fall directly onto a metro service line, we see that there are zip codes that have higher concentration of service usage for nonprofits, higher concentrations of refugees being placed there, and also have limited bus lines that run through the neighborhood. So for many refugees that do not have access to a car, getting to work, running errands like grocery shopping, getting services, being in places with community, it's difficult to get to those places unless you have a connection that has a car. So you typically depend on others, family, friends that have a car, public transportation. And as you can see here, it is limited to where you could access that. It's also important to note that refugees do want to move to safer areas with more space, better schools, but can't because of bus lines that don't run there or schedules don't work with the bus line services. And then finally, just touching on the interviews and focus groups. So we worked to do these with 3 different stakeholder groups. So the first were with refugee communities and leaders. The second was refugee resettlement agencies and service providers. And third with landlords and housing property managers. And for each of these groups, we asked questions to get more information about first, what are the barriers to housing that refugees are facing in Omaha? Second, what are their ideas for solutions to these housing barriers? We really wanted to hear what solutions people have heard of, are wanting, have seen to be successful for others. And third, what are their dreams for housing? For people who want to stay in Omaha and live here, work here, what do they want for housing for themselves, for their children, for future generations? And with that, I will pass it over to Jennifer to talk a little bit more about our findings.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Annie and Amelia. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we heard when we talked with refugee community members and leaders, landlords, and social service providers. So we talked to both resettlement agencies and nonprofit organizations that provide services to refugees. And I want to start with talking about housing dreams. So one of the things that we ask people, which is my favorite question that we ask people, especially refugee communities, is what do you dream about for your housing? What does your perfect housing look like? If you could describe your dream home to me, what would it be? And one person said, I dream about it every night. I want a house that is close to schools, stores, and hospitals and accessible. And seeing the dreams every night, but I wake up and I'm in a rental house. Another person said, it's just the freedom to do whatever you want. We're not living according to somebody else's rules. You get to choose what neighborhood you want to live in. So most refugees don't get to choose their first home. Their first home is found for them by a resettlement agency. That lease is already prepared and they get to the airport. They're driven to a home that they've never seen in a neighborhood they didn't choose. And resettlement agencies do a fantastic job looking for the best housing they can find. But as we saw, that is very limited, especially if you're a family of 12. So imagine you're showing up in the middle of the night, you're showing up at this house, and the next morning you're signing a year-long lease in a place that you didn't get to choose, in a place that may not be the best place for you. And so people really talked about, like, we want freedom, we want autonomy, we want to be able to paint our walls whatever color we want to paint them. We want to be able to plant a garden in our backyard. We want to be able to send our kids out into the backyard and have them play and not worry about them. We want autonomy. Many refugees are people who haven't had autonomy. They haven't had freedom for generations, for years, living in refugee camps. Going through the resettlement system where there isn't a ton of choice. They want space. We talked to a group of Karen youth who talked about wanting land so that they could have pigs and chickens, so that they could plant gardens and space, like really wanting to be able to just like be in a space that felt safe. And I don't want to paint, a picture of neighborhoods in Omaha being unsafe. I think that often happens with low-income neighborhoods. But I also think that you have to remember that refugees come with, by definition, experiences of trauma and experiences of feeling unsafe in their homes, feeling unsafe in refugee camps. And so coming to a neighborhood where they don't know their neighbors, where they may be with neighbors who are from different communities, speak different languages, they may be, coming home late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, and walking down streets that feel unsafe to them, coming home from their jobs. They're often working swing shift jobs. And so space or safety, I think, is kind of relative. You want to be in a space where you feel safe, and that may be the context of that may be the trauma that refugees have experienced in their histories. So, I want you to like keep this in your mind as we go back to some of the other more negative things that we heard, because I think it's really important to remember what people want, where they want to be, and to think about how we can get them to that place. So we took the data, the information that we heard from service providers, from refugee communities, and from landlords, and we kind of placed it into like a few different buckets. So when you read the report, you'll see like extensive explanations of some of these themes, but in order to condense things today, I want to talk about just a few groups of themes or ideas that we heard. The next one I want to talk about is affordability, safety, and access. So primarily what we heard from everyone across the board is that there is a lack of affordable, safe housing that is accessible to grocery stores, other community members, and employment. And so people, like Annie said, either have to walk miles to a bus stop, or those buses only run in the morning and the evening. We talked to a student who's in college and said, for me to get from my apartment to college by driving would take me 10 minutes. It takes me 2 hours to ride a bus that far because of the timetables of the bus and because of walking. And often I just walk home. And so that's a 45-minute walk home. And so people are really, wanting space that is accessible to them, or wanting living wage jobs that will support both rent and a car that doesn't break down. And so housing is expensive, especially for larger families. And so we have a lot of the families that are resettling, especially from Afghanistan, from Syria, have larger families. Of parents with maybe 6 kids or 7 kids. And housing regulations dictate that you can only have 2 people per bedroom. So if you have a family of 9, you need a 5-bedroom house. You cannot rent a 5-bedroom apartment in Omaha, first of all, because you can't find one, and second of all, because that rent would be out of price range for most folks that are working low-wage jobs. So you need to rent a house. There are very few houses to rent that are 5 bedrooms or more. Again, for a livable or for a low rents. Housing is often in unsafe neighborhoods. Housing is often far from school services and public transportation. We also heard a lot of kind of what Hannah talked about in the beginning. Housing is substandard. I think, you've had historically in Omaha some pretty egregious situations with apartment buildings, and those have maybe been covered by the news and maybe getting a little bit better, but refugees are still experiencing things like mold, appliances that break down and aren't fixed for months on end. Pest infestations, like even if you get rid of bed bugs in your apartment, they just go next door and then come back. So people are really concerned with the housing conditions that they're living in as well. The second bucket of themes are what we are calling system challenges. And by this, we mean challenges with the resettlement system, challenges with the housing system, challenges that are kind of outside of these more individual experiences that people have, and how that impacts. One of the biggest things we heard is that refugee resettlement services run out too early. And this is not because refugee resettlement agencies believe that 90 days is enough time. It is not because they want to be finished with refugees after those first 3 months. It's because they don't have the funding, because we only fund resettlement agencies in this country for 90 days. After that, people still call their resettlement caseworker, and those caseworkers have to decide, do I spend time on this? Do I spend time on this at the expense of the 16 other families I have arriving next week? Or do I say, I'm sorry, I can't help you any longer? And when that happens, refugees turn to the only other people that they have, which are nonprofit organizations that are historically across the country underfunded and overworked. So organizations like Restoring Dignity, other social service agencies. They also turn to their community members. They turn to people who have been here just a couple months longer than they have, who have just a tiny bit more experience or information than they do. And so community members are really helping each other. People are really reliant on each other. And there is so much unrecognized and unpaid labor that happens in refugee communities, with refugee leaders answering their phone at 2 o'clock in the morning because somebody lost their job and is about to get evicted, answering their phone in the middle of their weekend because someone is having a challenge and there's no one else to turn to. And so a lot of people said, one person said, but this speaks for everyone, we should extend helping everyone for at least 6 months or more, because 3 months is not enough. You need time to get a car, get your house, know what you're doing. Otherwise, it's going to be a struggle. Another person said, I just need somebody to walk with me, to hold my hand for the first 6 months or year that I'm here. People rent for a little while, and then very soon refugees want to buy houses. Overwhelmingly, refugees do very well when they resettle. Tanya was telling us last night that 98% of their caseload was employed within 3 months of arriving in Omaha last year. That's fantastic. Refugees contribute hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of dollars to local economies through work and taxes. But they can't do this if they don't have stable housing, if they don't have access to transportation, if they don't feel like their kids are safe and well educated. And they need more time than 3 months to navigate this. And so, everyone across social service agencies, refugee communities, and landlords agree that there just needs to be more help. Often refugees after their first year want to buy a home, but they don't know how to navigate the mortgage system. One person said, I have American-born friends who don't know anything about their mortgage. How many of you here know exactly how your mortgage works? Or were able to navigate that when you were buying your first home? So now imagine you're doing that in a language you don't understand. in a system that another person said, when we want to buy a house in our home country, we just go to the owner and ask him if we can buy it and then buy it. And so it's like navigating banks and loans and realtors and all of those things is really complicated. Refugees also don't get to pick the location of their first home. So a lot of people talked about how challenging it was to not be able to like decide where they want to live. Refugees also don't get to pick the city they move to. So, you know, people are told when they get on a plane, you're going to Omaha. Well, there's Omaha, I've never heard of that. I don't know where that is. I might not have family here. One thing that we didn't talk about in the numbers section or in the initial section is something called secondary migration. So while refugees are placed in a city through a resettlement agency, they don't always stay in that city. They often move to another city because they heard there are better jobs. Omaha is one of those places where there are more jobs available here. Rent is a little bit lower than, say, New York City or LA or Houston, where a lot of people are arriving. And so they move here. So we have a lot of folks coming from communities where they weren't initially placed. They have no access to services. Once you move out of your resettlement city, you can't access those services anymore. And so people are showing up here without the resettlement agency support. Anyway, I'm getting off track, I'm sorry. So because refugees don't get to pick their first first home location, that can feel really disorienting and really unsettling. To feel like you are finally in a place where you get to have freedom and autonomy, and yet the very foundation of your safety and security, your home, the place you want to come back to at the end of the day and feel safe, isn't something you pick. The other piece of that is that because of housing conditions, we're often sending refugees to hotels in their very first moments in Omaha. So they're not even going to an apartment because we can't find one when we have 2-3 hours of notice of a refugee's arrival in Omaha. And so then those hotel stays eat up that $1,300 that refugee resettlement agencies are given. And so then when it's time to find an apartment, that's money's gone. It's difficult to come up with first and last month's rent. So then again, you end up in a place that may not be your first. And finally, one of the biggest challenges we heard from both refugees and landlords is that refugees don't have rental histories. They don't have a list of the last 3 places that they lived with their landlord's phone number. They don't have employment histories, the 5 pay stubs that landlords might require because they just got here 24 hours ago. They don't have credit. They don't have a credit card. They don't have a bank account. And they don't have typical identification. So when you go to rent an apartment, you might need a driver's license or an ID card. Refugees don't have that. They are legally here. They have legal paperwork, but landlords don't always recognize that type of documentation or that type. And so landlords can be very resistant in renting to refugees. And refugees can feel like we just don't have what we need in order to move to a new apartment or in order to find a place. Which leads me to the last kind of bucket, which is landlord-tenant relationships. So we were really grateful to the 3 landlords that we talked to. We contacted 12. If agreed to speak with us. I think that is a point that is important to know, just how important it is to reach out to this missing group of stakeholders, right? They should be more represented here. And so we heard from both landlords and from refugees and from resettlement agencies especially, there is a real resistance on the part of landlords to rent to refugees because of what I just talked about in terms of documentation. Landlords are afraid that refugees aren't going to get jobs, that there isn't enough funding to support them through a year of rent. They're afraid, often due to xenophobia, that people who don't speak English, people who are coming from somewhere else may not be the best tenants. And there is a real need for support around communication. Many folks, refugee folks, told us that if I don't speak the language and if I don't speak English and my oven breaks down or my refrigerator breaks down or my plumbing goes bad, I'm not going to call my landlord because I don't know how to tell them what I need. And I certainly don't understand what they're telling me. And so landlords sometimes don't hear landlords. But landlords also have difficulty communicating with refugees too. And so they will often avoid telling someone, hey, your rent is a little bit late, because it's hard to communicate that. So landlords especially talked about, like, we just need help with communication. We need people to help us navigate these relationships. Housing advocates at refugee resettlement agencies and places like Restoring Dignity work so hard to educate landlords. And we do have some great landlords in the city. Tanya from Rec was telling us last night that there are several landlords in Omaha who are former refugees themselves. And for those folks, they just get it. They know, okay, this person doesn't have the adequate paperwork right now, but they'll get it. They'll get a job. I know they'll be okay. Another landlord talked about the importance of trusting resettlement agencies and how hard it is to trust resettlement agencies, which to me underscored the importance of relationships between landlords and resettlement agencies. This person said, you know, I have to trust that the resettlement agency is going to be there. I have to trust that what the resettlement agency is telling me is accurate, and that might not be a trusting relationship at this point. So again, this underscores successful housing requires a strong and present advocate, somebody who has time and is paid to navigate those relationships.
One participant said language barriers are the biggest problem. If landlords talk to foreign people in English, they don't understand and they'll say yes to everything. With this, some people take advantage of that.
Okay, so this is the most exciting part. We're going to talk about recommendations. So we have a lot of them. If you read the report, you will see multiple recommendations that we have based on all of this research. We also, go back a slide, sorry. We also reviewed multiple case studies of organizations across the country that have done what we think of as like innovative or exciting programs to support refugee housing needs. And so some of these recommendations come from those ideas.
So recommendations in the report are divided into 5. Funding,
Partnerships, so places where we think there could be innovative partnerships between resettlement agencies and landlords, or housing advocates and social service agencies. Programmatic changes, or changes to different types of programs or how programs are offered. Policy changes, so for you policymakers out there, things that we think could really strengthen housing for refugees. And then future research. We are researchers, so we really love data and we want more of it. We want to be able to send resettlement agencies to Washington, D.C. or to the, Omaha chambers to say, here is some hard data that tells you what these problems are. And so we think there's room for future research. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of these recommendations today. So funding. We think there needs to be a lot more funding for this issue. The problem is lack of funding. Like I said earlier, resettlement agencies do not want to stop providing services to refugees at 90 days. They stop because they don't have the money to do more, which then means nonprofits, typically underfunded, take up that slack. And so we think funding is a great way to solve this.
Restoring Dignity already does fantastic housing education programs for refugees and landlords.
What a lot of refugees and landlords said is we just need more education. Landlords want to know more about how to rent to refugees, how to work with refugees. They want support around that. Refugees want more education about how to navigate home maintenance for things like furnaces or plumbing that they may not have had experience with in the past. So how do I navigate a home? How do I maintain a home? They also want information on how to buy a home. How do I develop a credit history? How do I start that when I first get to the United States so that a year later, when I want to buy a home, I have a credit history. I have the ability to show the bank that I can do it. And just how to navigate that. There are ways to extend resettlement services beyond 90 days. So bridge grants and things like that that can support post 90-day experiences or 90-day services. And so working with philanthropists and funders and policymakers to be able to find funding to support post 90-day services.
We're encouraging nonprofit organizations to partner with policymakers to engage with efforts to build safe, affordable, and size-appropriate housing. So there are some examples across the country of loans to renovate houses that are 3 bedrooms and turn them into 5 bedrooms. Are the ways that we can make housing that is compliant with housing policy so that people can rent, space that works for their family. Omaha used to have a landlord incentive and risk mitigation fund that was funded with COVID-19 dollars. A risk mitigation fund is a fund that landlords can tap into to mitigate risks like people breaking their lease or people causing more damage to an apartment than a security deposit covers. And so a landlord has that kind of backup in case that's needed. An incentive program is a program that provides incentives, small incentives to landlords to rent to refugee families. Both of these programs were incredibly successful. Landlords loved them, housing service agencies loved them, and we think that it's kind of low-hanging fruit to bring back some of those programs with very minimal funding. Not minimal funding for the programs, but it doesn't take, this is not $1 billion, right? This is the project here that I think is a fantastic idea and one that I really want to encourage people to put support behind, and that's creating temporary supportive housing for new refugees. So we heard from a lot of folks that what they want is a place to land when they first get here that's safe, that is comforting, that is embedded in community, and that has supportive services wrapped around them. And there are two different models that we found out in the world that were successful. One is to create like a brick and mortar welcoming center that has size appropriate housing for refugees that's temporary, 6 to 9 months, 3 to 9 months, where people can come and pay a nominal rent so that they're developing a rental history. They can be surrounded by supportive services so that they can get jobs, get their kids in school, start learning English, kind of settle in. They're with other people who have similar experiences to them. And then they can choose where they want to live. They can say, okay, I've been in Omaha long enough to say, I want to live in North Omaha. I want to live in West Omaha. I want to live in this neighborhood that's close to my favorite restaurant or my favorite grocery store or my kid's school. And they have the ability to make that choice and have that freedom. The other model that we looked at are community members donating homes or spaces within their homes as temporary landing spaces for refugees. So again, 3 to 6 to 9 months for folks to, maybe you have like a little mother-in-law apartment in your basement, or you have, you know, a room in your house that you could give to a family in order to stay for a few months, again, while they get themselves on their feet, and then can choose where they want to live and just have more. And then we looked at partnerships, so ways to improve, or not improve, but like find unique partnerships between resettlement agencies, refugee community leaders, landlords. And we really think that putting effort towards building and sustaining relationships between landlords, refugees, and resettlement agencies is a thing that should be explored. We found one sort of interesting example in Atlanta where resettlement agencies, there are 4 resettlement agencies operating in Atlanta, Georgia, and they created a nonprofit organization called Welcoming Co-op that does all of the housing for all refugees resettling in that city. So instead of one resettlement agency trying to build relationships with landlords, another resettlement agency trying to for the 1 2-bedroom apartment that, you know, you have 2 families arriving on the same day. It's one organization, and that organization can have staff that dedicates all of their time to finding homes, building relationships with landlords, acting as advocates. They can both support that 90-day resettlement services, but also with other forms of funding can continue past that 90 days. So they can act as advocates for refugees beyond that 90 days. The other kind of example that we saw that would be interesting to pursue is hiring folks who already live in apartment buildings that have a lot of refugee families in them, who are former refugees themselves, and training them to be on-site housing advocates for refugee families. So people who you could call to help interpret, people you could call if your furnace breaks down or your stove breaks down, who can help you explain that to your landlord, and then also help the landlord to explain to a potential tenant or a tenant about how to you know, the maintenance of that. So, you know, I think there are multiple ways to kind of improve those relationships. And then there is a program called Welcome Corps. It's a brand new program with the federal government where groups of 5 or more people can come together and resettle a refugee family themselves. You still get support from refugee resettlement agencies, you get training, and there is a lot of evidence, especially from other countries that have this type of resettlement system, that having a group of people who come together and volunteer to support a family can be sometimes just as or more effective than a resettlement agency, because they have the time and energy and resources to focus on that family alone. They don't have a caseload of 20 people that they're trying to navigate. And so we did recommend increasing welcome core applications in this. We're almost done. Future research. Again, we're researchers. We have business cards. We can give them out in case you're interested in funding more research. But we really think that this study, as we looked around at different literature, this is one of the only comprehensive studies of housing barriers for refugees that's been conducted, and it is definitely one of the only ones that has refugee voices at the center. A lot of the research that we looked at is on behalf of resettlement agencies or on behalf of service providers, often who are former refugees themselves or employ refugees, but this is one of the only ones that has stories directly from refugees themselves. We've also thought a lot about what is the housing trajectory for folks over time. So when people first come to the United States and then 3, 4, 5 years later, when do they become stable? When does housing stabilize? At what point do people have different housing needs? The housing needs of somebody who has been here 3 months are very different than the housing needs of somebody who's been here 5 years. There are also, differences in ethnic groups in terms of how housing does, how people fare with their housing. And so we're really interested in understanding what is it about the experiences of resettlement for Afghans that might be different than the resettlement experience for Somali communities. And then we're also interested in funding comparative research to look at housing barriers and solutions in other cities. So Omaha is a huge resettlement city, and as you saw from just one agency going from 300 people resettled to almost 2,000 people resettled in the last couple of years, that's just one agency. And agencies, social service agencies, are dealing with all kinds of folks that are migrating here after their resettlement to another city. And so those numbers are much, much bigger. And there are other cities that have gone through similar changes. Minneapolis is one of them. We're like a couple years ahead of Omaha, and I think Omaha is going to be where Minneapolis is in a few years, with really strong, vibrant communities of folks. And I think Omaha can learn from, cities that have been through this transition and can teach cities that are the new cities. I was just looking at resettlement in Idaho, which is not a state that I would have thought that refugees could resettle to, but I think it's one of the next places where people are going to be coming to. I think there's a lot Omaha could offer in terms of having some comparative data. I'm going to end there, and we have all kinds of time for questions.
All right, we want to thank Wilder for this incredible presentation. We're going to be beginning our question and answer session. I understand we promised you guys an hour, so for those of you who need to leave, we have staff outside who will be handing out the report if you'd read it, and also the one-pager. We'd ask everybody at least take the one-pager. So if you need to exit, you can exit now, but we're going to start up a robust question and answer session. There is a microphone over here. We would ask that everyone approach it. And when you speak into it, speak loud so the people on the online in the webinar can hear you. And then we will also be answering questions from the webinar. So if you have questions, please come up. Don't be shy.
Andy Wetzel with the Douglas County Health Department. The getting to the language access issues and how much the communication is a challenge. I'm wondering where there's opportunities for, obviously like in-person interpretation is ideal, but cost prohibitive and just the demands on those people already are usually very high for our bilingual community members. But I'm wondering where are the opportunities for using you know, what hospitals have and now the health department has, where you could go ahead and like get a video interpreter available, or where there are opportunities to use technology like Google Translate to be able to facilitate some of it that then needs more intensive stuff, but at least facilitate that some. So thoughts on the technology pieces and where there might be opportunities to use that.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, we have Restoring Dignity here to answer these questions. We have Refugee Empowerment Center, Lutheran Family Services is here, and we have the Wilder team. So between all of us, hopefully we can answer your questions. Going back to Andy's question, he was asking for if you couldn't hear it in the webinar, can we use the technology that hospitals use for landlords who need to communicate with tenants? I think it's possible. We would just need a funder to fund that. And I don't think that would be hard. I think one of our agencies could easily absorb that as long as there's funding. So that's another funding opportunity.
Jake Hoffman, oh, just curious on the research that was done, some of the other programs that were parallel opportunities for interventions. What the role of sort of traditional affordable housing resources are addressing this, either tax credit or voucher, or there's other programs that opportunities or challenges within those service populations.
Thank you. So the question is about other forms of supportive or affordable housing. The Section 8 waiting list in Omaha is at least 2 years currently. So it is really difficult for refugee families to, usually it takes a couple months to even know to apply for Section 8 housing. And so by the time you do that, it's a few years before you're going to get into Section 8. And then other forms of affordable housing may have, like Habitat for Humanity has certain requirements that not all refugees fit. And so it's really hard to have affordable, those typical affordable housing resources available to folks. There are cities that set aside Section 8 vouchers specifically for refugees. So keeping a set of those aside, I think that's definitely something that social service agencies can work with policymakers, the policymakers that are in the room, or aides or representatives. I think that's a really great, again, like easy fix to kind of set aside some vouchers, or to think about, are there ways that we could build affordable housing or set aside affordable housing specifically for refugees as a vulnerable population.
My name is Ken David. There's a hole in your research. And forgive me, my background, my PhD is in research design and statistics. I'm sorry, but churches were never mentioned. And part of the vital community of Omaha is we have a lot of churches involved with the refugee community. My church in particular, was working with many ethnic families. And doing things like car repair, helping them with the rental of immigrants, helping green card, which is what I consider a Fair Employment Act for lawyers, and things like that. And they were never mentioned in your research. Did you talk to any churches?
We didn't talk to churches specifically. I think what we're looking at in this particular study are kind of system-wide changes that can support multiple folks at a time. I think this is like sort of a personal opinion. I think that there is incredible work that is done by volunteers, incredible work. The numbers of hours that volunteers, especially churches, put into, and resettlement agencies often are church-based agencies, no longer necessarily with a church-based mission, but Lutheran Family Services, World Church Service, those organizations. What I do think is that is unpaid labor that I think should also be shared by government, policy, and resettlement agencies. And I think what often happens is that resettlement services rely on volunteers who are phenomenal and outstanding to do work that could also be funded for multiple people, not just one or two families, for multiple people. And that's kind of what we were looking at here, is like, how can we have more universal support for folks and solve this at a system level?
Yeah, I also want to say for this study, so we had $137,500 to conduct this study. And we wanted to include a lot more people, and we included every single person that we could for the budget that we had. So that's another reason why churches weren't included, is we really had to narrow down how much time and funding could be put towards to interviewing people. So You guys do amazing work, and I just want to thank you. I mean, churches really do amazing work in what you do to support families, and that definitely needs to be recognized. Oh, can you speak into the microphone? Oh, can you introduce yourself too, so people know who you are?
Settlement Center. Hi, everyone online. So I just wanted to say that often churches, volunteers, people like that, we didn't really talk about them as much in this research because this was about the 90 days, the first 90 days, and we do. Yes, so we are.
Yeah, so the churches that I've seen involved, they're meeting refugee families every year.
Yes.
So I don't, your answer is a little shallow.
So let me just confirm. So I was going to say, so we are trying to involve churches and volunteer agencies so much more right now, especially with Welcome for now involved. So that does need to be more of a conversation, is getting people involved earlier than that 90 days, so that when that 90 days does come up, we have somebody to hand it over to. We can do the very basics of those 90 days, which is what this research was about. But we've got to start getting more people involved because there are other options like sponsorship, co-sponsorship, welcome for, which now are taking away the resettlement agency responsibility altogether. So yes, we absolutely 100% appreciate the volunteers and the churches as well, and would like to start involving them more in this.
Yeah, and I also, just to respond to your question, Restoring Dignity alone serves 32 ethnic groups. And we wanted to include every single ethnic group in this study as well. We did not have the funding to do so. We did not leave churches out on purpose. Like, it was a funding issue. And so we really had to be careful with who we chose. And hopefully in the next study, if there is another study, we can include more people with a bigger budget. So, yeah. Next question.
My name is Diana Rogel, and when the map came up with zip codes, I couldn't help but think about some of our history with redlining. And you know, that particularly was done to keep people out and the real estate and all of that, but the transportation routes are very clustered within those areas, and I wonder what can we do as a community to push for public transportation access in other areas so that refugees can feel a little more confident being able to have that ability to go where they want to go. I think that is a big part that is missing. I feel like at the Omaha Refugee Task Force, we often have transportation come up as a topic because it's a real issue that people navigate just in general, physically being able to go from space to space are happy. So I wonder if that is something that you touched upon, especially on those implementations.
Yeah. Yes. So absolutely. Yes, you're right. And I think that this is something that our city needs to look at. Our elected officials who are in this room, people who are providing funding to our bus systems, they need to be funded better. And we need to start getting bus routes out into a lot more neighborhoods, because when I was reading the study, one of the things that really popped out at me was that there's a lot of families who want to move to other parts of Omaha, but don't have a car. And so they can't move to those parts of Omaha because there are no bus lines. So MAPA is very well aware of this. They created all the maps for this study. And so we really are going to push them and whoever funds MAPA and the bus companies to start creating more routes. Yeah. Yep.
I also think this is an interesting partnership area where, you know, often refugees are working in similar places and similar locations. I know where we live in Minnesota, there's a meatpacking plant where many refugees work. And because of transportation issues, that plant has started busing, like they have their own buses and transportation. I don't think that's the answer. I think Omaha needs to improve its transportation for everyone. It's something we heard over and over and over from everyone, not like our cab driver, our like people who's at the hotel we're staying at, not just refugee families. The transportation is terrible, or public transportation is terrible. But I do think there's a good partnership between companies that are employing a lot of refugees, transportation agencies, and the refugee task force. If there are like unique partnerships that could be carved out of this, I think that's another way to kind of push people. If you can get those companies behind like, hey, we got a lot of folks that we can't get to work. Can you help us get them to work?
Good morning, everybody. My name is James Cho. I'm one of the former refugees. I came here in 2007. But I have two questions particularly, and these are going to the agency that we have here in Omaha, Nebraska. Immigrant Family Services, Refugees Empowerment Center. When I came, Refugees Empowerment Center used to be South Sudan Community Agency. It was founded by one of the men from my country too. So my question is, and I work with both of them until 2015, and now I'm working with people that have been affected by disability, so I'm still helping in the community. The two questions that I have, it looks like North Omaha and South Omaha have been doing really amazing job with the migrants. And I don't know why the city is divided into two, because when you come here as a new migrant, there will be no migrant that can go beyond 72nd. We are always from 72nd all the way down here. Why is that? You don't really have any apartment beyond 72nd that the refugee can afford to live in. Why is it not Omaha all the time? I want to know that. Second question. There was one time when I applied with my family for Section 8, trying to get a house. They approved us, and then we told them we need a house after 72nd. And when they did that, they denied us because of that. So the city is dividing into two. Why is it North Omaha is doing so much with immigrants and West Omaha is not doing that? Why?
That's a really great question. And for people who, James, thank you. For people who if you couldn't hear that, I want to repeat this for our webinar people. James is saying he came here as a refugee, and what he has seen is that refugees are limited to going no further than 72nd Street and going no further than North or South Omaha. And when he has tried to get past 72nd Street, he's consistently denied. And that's a really good question.
Question, and I'm always so happy when that question is answered for other people. I actually am, because then we can explain what's happening as well. So, I mean, yesterday I had 3 families that came to visit me to say, why are you reselling us in this place? We've heard it's a dangerous place. They had all sorts of things to say about the places that we were resettling them. They didn't want that neighborhood. They wanted to be out further west. Understood. We then went through all of our landlords that we have who agreed to rent to refugees. In other words, they agreed to take people who don't have a rental history, who don't have a job history. There are very, very few of those landlords. I think I have about 8 on our list right now who are currently agreeing to do that. And there are only 2 further out west beyond the 72nd, right? And those 2 did not have places at that time. And so we have no choice but to put them in the places that are available. We're also having more situations where there are medically fragile cases that are coming. A lot of them this year. I don't know what's going on, but this year we have so many more medically fragile cases than before. And so there are a number of issues that come up with that. One is that we are trying to find more housing that's actually on the first level because they can't climb stairs. But also we have to make sure that it is even more affordable than usual, because at 3 months, they're not going to have their SSI. So if they can't work because they're disabled, they're going to have to rely on donations until their SSI becomes available to them. And as was stated earlier, OHA, that's years of waiting. And so affordability really is the reason why we can't go beyond 72nd. And, you know, I was talking to Lisa and some of his other colleagues earlier this morning to say that we've really got to have kind of a coalition that actually starts talking to more landlords and really educating them. But as RAs, we're fighting fires. That's all we really have time for. And developing those long, trusting relationships with landlords really takes a lot of time. And that's why I think the research was also saying that one of the biggest things is there's got to be a paid position for somebody to be talking to more landlords, whether they be on 7 seconds or just within. We've got to have more variety. So thanks for bringing that up.
I do have one concern that we're going to clarity of, I don't know how to community, right? I have just comments on some of the things that have happened. I think that Atlanta co-op that we talked about would be very much needed. And I just, having lived in Omaha my whole life and seeing the generosity of foundations here in philanthropists, they want to help and they want to sustain nonprofits and make sure that the people that are passionate about what they do are funded appropriately so they stay where they're at. Because I see a huge turnover of staff because of burnout, basically. I've actually been involved with refugees for over 40 years here in Omaha. Okay, another point. Transportation. For years, I've gone into the past to some transportation meetings for public transportation, particularly bus. I've expressed to no avail. We need small buses that go on more routes and reserve the big buses for the major routes. And I was just in Canada, and that's what they use. They have small, like, airport shuttle buses that they have around town all over the place. And I don't know why we can't do that. Which kind of leads to my second point. I think everybody involved with all these organizations needs to understand the structure of how things get done in the city. I saw Danny Bailey here, but he's not here anymore. I don't know who else is involved online, but we have some great council members. But having gone to some council meetings, I think their hands are tied when I have observed and understand what the planning board and stuff. Things happen before it ever gets to council, and all they can do is approve it because they have to please the mayor, and the mayor has an awful lot of power. I think we all need to understand how things get funded, because I know I'm not the only one in this room or in the city that looks at the Orbit bus empty and the expense that was involved with that. Now the streetcar thing, what's being done to happen? Help Joe Blow that lives in the middle of 68104 and has no transportation. And it takes 2 hours to get somewhere that should take 10 minutes in a car. Now, those are the things we need to understand in every agency. Another point, talking about language. We have world speech here in Omaha. They're trying to figure it out. You know, that's an Omaha organization that is trying to get up there to provide translation and interpretation for landlords or anybody that needs it. Now, my other one, and I guess you guys know, I've seen Bayview Foundation. Anybody want to look it up online? They are a wonderful organization out of South Dakota that houses, started off in the 70s, housing refugees. I would like to know what your vision is for this temporary housing plan, because that's been something I've dreamed of. I still think Crossroads land is available. It's just pushing dirt around still. And that's the ideal place, but the library should have been there, not across the street. How are you envisioning providing all the support services at temporary housing? Because safety is the #1 issue, where they feel safe in their little community when they first come, so that they feel like they have somebody to ask for all this help.
Yep. Bev, thank you. Amazing points. Thank you. Bev has been involved for 4 decades with refugees, and she consistently shows up every time advocating, and so thankful for her. I want to just speak to 2 points that you said. I really believe we have an OTAC member here. OTAC and IPL, they're a group that really helps get people together to create change, because it is very intimidating going before city council and the state legislature when you don't know how it works. And I think that the transportation issue, maybe OTAC needs to start that up and start talking about how do we get mini buses around the city? How do we do this affordably? So I'm calling you guys in. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad you brought this up, is Restoring Dignity, after the results of the study, we are going to be starting a 6-month task force. We are going to be inviting all of the leaders of all of the refugee serving agencies to come together and figure out how do we do a welcome center and how do we do it right, where people can come and get temporary housing with all supportive services on site. I think that would make life 100% better for so many people. And so we will be convening that. Yes, so Keith Station, I don't know if Keith is still, is he here? Is he here? So Keith, so the mayor's office somebody asked, is the mayor's office involved? The mayor's office was here today. And so they are aware, but oh, you're Keith. Oh my gosh. Well, you said he walked out, then I was like, oh, then he must have walked out. Okay. I have never met Keith Station, so this is hi, Keith. This is Keith Station with the mayor's office. And I'm so glad that you're here because we're going to need your help flat out. And, you know, from what I have seen, Mayor Stothert has been supportive to the refugee community, especially with what happened at Yale Park. And so we would love to have you guys involved in that conversation. Okay, next person.
I just want to say thank you for the presentation and the time for research that went into this. I'm James Kranz. I'm the Senior Program Director for International Council for Refugees and Immigrants. Sorry, a little too tall for this. We're one of the underfunded nonprofits here in Omaha. We recently just got approved to do refugee resettlement. My question kind of touches on what Hannah discussed at the introduction, and one of the more predominant issues that I'm seeing is just, you know, frankly, blatant breaches of the warranty of habitability in these houses. And I was just wondering what your research has shown, or any, you know, personal experience or any insight on kind of how to handle it, because really one option would be to have them pretty much get out of their lease within 2 weeks if the breach isn't cured. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, you have a family of 12, and you're going to expect them to move within 2 weeks and find new housing. And then you're also stalling the relationship with a landlord, albeit it may not be doing the things they should be doing, but still providing housing to refugees. So I don't know if there's anything that the research indicated that would be best to go about it, maybe working with like the Omaha City Council or something like that. I don't know what your thoughts or insights.
Yeah, well, if anyone else wants to answer this after me, they can. So I have been in hundreds of substandard homes and have seen a lot of horrible things. We do have a full, part-time advocate who's going to come on full-time. Her name's Elizabeth Ajongo, and she works with families who are going through housing issues. We've worked with City Code a lot. The problem with City Code is that if they come in and they deem that it's unsafe, they have to shut the unit down, and the family then loses their home. And so we're really walking a really tight rope with that. So I think that's a conversation. I don't have an answer for you right now. We're working on it. We try to work with landlords and families all the time on that, but it continues to be a problem. And something that I would say is that we probably need to increase rental inspections, mandatory rental inspections from once every 10 years to probably once every 3 years. And so city council did approve the once every 10-year inspection cycle a few years ago. And I really would like to see that every 3 to 4 years. I think that would help.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I think one thing that really helped was the incentives when people had to go, I know it was COVID related, but when we had those incentives, it tended to be that the landlords were, they were more careful about actually meeting the needs of their tenants because they were trying to get to that 6-month point where they would get that extra $500. And so they weren't just evicting like that. As soon as that stopped, you tend to have people who are like, well, if we don't like the way that it is, like just leave, you know? They don't have an incentive to keep going with them. And so we started seeing some of those issues coming up after that incentive. So the incentive is a solution that's there.
Yeah, and if there's any funders listening, Metro Housing Collaborative is the one who ran that program very well. And they just lost the money because of the COVID money stopped. So if you guys are looking to fund something, Metro Housing Collaborative, get the landlord incentive program back on track. That would be great for a lot of people. All right, Keith Station.
Good morning. I apologize. So I'm Keith Station. I'm very office at the city on task force, along with my colleague, David, who's Chief Director of the Human Rights Relations Department, and she's here as well. And so I have a lot of opinions, and I'm also I have the honor of serving as a board member for Front Porch Investments. So it's really good to see this report. So thank y'all for doing that, presenting it so well. I have a lot of opinions on a lot of the things that were discussed here, questions asked, housing, transit, public health, language access, issues that spill over into how the unique challenges of people who are unhoused. And also avoiding taking a one-size-fits-all approach to solutions. And I can see in y'all's research that you didn't do that. So I appreciate the nuanced delivery of what the solutions could look like. It's important to remember. So with all that said, I can't speak for the mayor today. So but I'm here, and what I will commit to doing is making sure that our city council members, Councilman Rowe and Bailey who are here today. And so I'll make sure that they, and their colleagues, the remaining members of the council, hear what was discussed today and have the access to the data that was shared in the presentation. So my question is have any of you seen any models elsewhere in the country where the city, the municipality, has really had a formalized partnership or department or investment in this work that worked well and learned from? Because right now, to the point that the mayor is supportive of making sure we are part of the solution in this work. The mayor is supportive of making sure that the resettlement agencies are have the resources that they need, and also understands that the work is challenging and it's imperfect, and also I appreciate the mention of the trauma that people are experiencing in the country. All that said, I know that there are some cities elsewhere that have really I guess efficient and collaborative partnerships that exist. What are some other cities you could learn from?
That's a fantastic question. I think that more cities should be involved. I think this often ends up being a nonprofit or a philanthropic solution, partially because it can't be one size fits all. And I think sometimes cities tend to want, for good reason, to serve everyone equally. And there needs to be like not one size fits all. However, Salt Lake City, Utah has their housing authority has a supportive housing for refugees process. And so it's housing for refugees, and they get actually employment support. And so it's people who are part of their employment program, their like TANF program, and their public housing program who are refugees, get supportive services and discounted rent for a period of time. So I think that's one really great model that's wraparound, where you're involving temporary assistance for needy families or aid to dependent children, you're including public housing, and you're including resettlement agencies in kind of that support. The city of Seattle has recently adopted a city planning strategic plan that focuses on equitable development across the city. And so while that's not refugee specific, they do provide a lot of funding for organizations that are focused on equitable community development. So developing affordable housing. So city funds are going to support housing programs, community center programs, neighborhood development programs that are focused on equity or focused on addressing things like redlining and things like gentrification and housing challenges there. So those are two that we included in our list of recommendations. Like Hannah said, if you would like to fund another study, I think it'd be really great to do some because there are cities out there that have really fantastic relationships. I think we just need to, there needs to be a way to kind of gather that data.
Seattle, Salt Lake City.
Seattle and Salt Lake City. Yep. And they're both in our report if you want to look at this.
Hi, my name is Dawn, and I'm who decided this volunteer got to work today. Hi, I need to be tall. My name is Dawn Esling, and as April mentioned today, I'm a member of the Everyone community. And that's one of the volunteer hats I wear, but I wear a few others as well. And the questions I'm going to, or comments I'm going to make today are probably related to the others more than to OTAP. First thing I want to, keep Parker on the transportation situation.
No, he's right there. We keep thinking he's leaving.
Don't take this personally, but I think it's sad that we have a city that has dedicated more funding to streetcars than it has to bike lanes that are safe in the city. We have a number of people that ride bikes to work because it's their only access to transportation. And I weekly am taking bikes into shops to get flat tires repaired because of the crap that's on the road, or the holes that are in the road, or whatever is on the road. Not to mention people that are going to emergency rooms for falling off of their bicycles for riding to and from work. So that's the first point I want to make as far as transportation. The second point I want to make is, yes, there needs to be more metro area transit routes. There also needs to be better communication when a route stops for whatever reason it stops for. Because what we've experienced is that we have people that are getting on a bus at 5:20 in the morning to be at a job at 6 o'clock in the morning and finding out that that bus just isn't running that day because there's construction. So what do those people do? They get up on one of those aforementioned bicycles at 5:20 in the morning and they ride in the dark from 45th and Bedford to Creighton to go to work because they know they have to be at their job. So those are the sort of, I can go on and on about the situations we've seen. And all of these examples I've stated are a result of another organization that I'm part of called Omaha Welcomes a Stranger. And Omaha Welcomes a Stranger is an organization that houses mostly immigrant families. So hence this discussion is pertinent, but it's not as pertinent because we see different situations in the immigrant community than in the refugee community. There's more funding in the refugee community than there is in the immigrant community. So our immigrants are reliant pretty much 100% on our volunteers for taking care of them once they get to this city. And they're the ones I'm talking about. They're housed at Abide, which is on 45th and Bedford. We rent a dorm on the Abide campus. We currently have about 7 families living there, and we have 12 families that are within the city somewhere that we are currently taking care of. And by we, I mean a group of volunteers that has just taken this on as something that we want to commit to. It is somewhat faith-based because we work with the Common Fathers and the Sisters of Mercy, and a lot of our families come to us from the Annunciation House in El Paso. So this is an example of the temporary housing situation that you guys just talked about, but it's being done by a group of people that just decide to be good-hearted citizens, work with people that they love that have spent time at the Annunciation House to try to bring people to the city of Omaha and find a new home for them. So there's a lot of crossover service, I think, between, Hannah and I have talked, I've talked to Christine Kramer at Refugee Empowerment Center, I consider her a friend. Nazir and I have talked, I've talked to Chris Thomas at Lutheran Family Services. There are so many people that do so many good things in this city. I've talked to Nikki Peterson at Front Porch, I could go on and on, Jay Hoppy at Hoppy Investments, I could go on and on, but the problem is that it sometimes seems that that's all in a vacuum, it's all in a bubble, and that, of course, the study was great because it included a lot of those aforementioned people that I just said, but there has to be a better way for us to consolidate services, not only to help refugees, but to help immigrants, and to be quite honest, to help our working poor in the city when it comes to housing and finding places that are safe for people to live. So I'm done with my rant for now. But I just wanted you to know that temporary housing situation does exist, thanks to a small group of people that are making it happen with the environment.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Those are all amazing points that you made. And I also, so I'm a solutions person. I'm the kind of person where, if we're going to come up and talk about problems, I want to come up with solutions. So that's why I think that the task force we're going to create for 6 months is going to be important. I think that we need to start having groups, not just that Restoring Dignity pushes forward, but even that OTALK pushes forward to other people to start saying, how do we fix this? And then come up with tangible solutions and then take it to the people who have the money and have the power to do it and say, this is what we think is best. And that's what I would encourage all of you to do today. I don't want to walk away with all these problems and, oh, it's so overwhelming. No, we need to start coming up with solutions. So start forming your groups, start coming up with solutions, and let's do it. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm RJ with Douglas County GA. I used to work at Lutheran Family Services doing housing coordination. So there's a lot of, in the city, there's a lot of affordable housing developments being developed that refugees somehow don't qualify. So so somebody needs to talk to HUD, because we did a process where we went through everything, and the local HUD office called the central office, and they just didn't qualify. So the housing OHA or Bellevue or Sarpy. So just, but there's a lot of affordable housing, development coming up, but they haven't qualified according to HUD groups. So one thing would be that. And the other thing for the city would be something like, coordinated entry for refugees, where, we would have some kind of like a threshold or old match structure which would be funded by the city. And there would be some kind of a list that, we coordinate. I think that's a good, working model we can follow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and just so you guys know, for those of you who are interested in working on solutions, we're part of the Omaha Refugee Task Force Housing Subcommittee. And our next meeting, Papa, could you find the date of the next meeting so we can tell people?
August.
So it's the third. So we're going to be doing a strategic planning session August 21st, and we can post that publicly. We'll post that publicly on our Facebook. But if you'd like to come and be part of the solution, we're going to start laying out all of the ideas, and we're bringing in someone from Douglas County who her specialty is helping people organize ideas. And we're actually going to start coming up with a list of what need to be done and then start assigning it to people to get it done. So you guys are welcome to come to that if you'd like to be part of that.
Thanks for very much appreciate it. I work with Keith in the mayor's office, and my work isn't specifically with refugees, but there's overlap a lot. I work with within homeless services and community, and just trying to coordinate those efforts for our unhoused neighbors. Appreciate Arjun giving a little credit for putting entry. That's one of my passions in life. And it's just a very great system that's done well. I did want to mention one thing in particular for transportation that's come up a lot. Metro Area Transit does have an advisory committee. We meet monthly. I believe it's the second Wednesday at 6 o'clock in person at their offices, and we have a Zoom everyone's welcome in the public, and then yearly, anyone can apply to be on that advisory committee, so, you know, bring your thoughts, bring your concerns to that group, and then the advisor board and also their board, this year is going to be elected officials. Previously it wasn't, so there's a little bit of a different dynamic there, and so pay attention to who's going to be elected on that board.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you so much.
And this is another hat. I've been part of the statewide coalition that's looking at immigration as a solution to the workforce. So I know today is focused on Omaha, as it should be, but I just want to make mention that this is not an Omaha problem, this is Nebraska.
Yeah.
This affordable housing is a big time Nebraska problem. And we know we have communities like North Platte, Skyline, Columbus, and I can go on and on, that have meatpacking plants that have a lot of immigrants that there is not enough housing for. So whatever solutions we find for Omaha, I would like to think that we can broaden the lens to include the entire state of Nebraska, because we know that it's a problem for our entire state. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you so much.
Also not about Miller, it's another one, it's very good, it's great. I didn't live in public school, and we have a lot of refugee families in our area. The transportation issue is a problem, the housing issue is a problem. It's not just 68104, 68, it's not just that. It's, so as you look at this, I know you looked at a small portion of Omaha, but as you look at solutions, I hope we'll look at solutions that will help all of us across the metro area.
Thank you. For those who are still listening in the webinar, we had a person who's from Millard Public Schools who spoke up and said that these problems that we talked about in the city, they're not just exclusive to Omaha. They're going on in Millard, Elkhorn, imagine Papillion, La Vista, the transportation issues, the lack of housing. And so we need to be including all of these areas as we work together.
Hello everyone, my name is Siddharth from the New York for Refugee and Confinement Services. When you know, Martin, I think it's new rule for the I'm based in Lincoln, but I've been coming from Omaha, and I've been confinement services for 6 years. There's a book actually called I Totally Be Canada. It's about refugee experiences in the US. It's an amazing book. I think refugee system in the US it's very broken, and it needs a lot of attention from everyone, federal government, state government. I think every city has a unique challenges and success stories. Recently, I was in a conference in Louisville, Kentucky. They have amazing models for success, and yeah, they're doing an amazing job. The local officials and they have amazing passports and things like that. So we have in Lincoln we have worked with the mayor office at the it's what's called welcoming city plan. So the welcoming New York welcoming plan will actually is coming up in September sometime soon. So Lincoln City is going to be officially as a welcoming, recognized welcoming city as a first step, hopefully, or maybe even 5. Yeah, I just want to make that point. I'm using my role, local family services. So if you have any questions or things like that, please come see me. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions in the chat I want to get to. Someone asked what comes next in terms of sharing this report to hopefully inform some policy changes. So Restoring Dignity will be sharing this. We did invite every elected official in the state of Nebraska to this presentation, and we will be sharing this with every elected official in the state of Nebraska. And then we're also going to be pushing it out to everybody that we know. And so I would encourage all of you guys to do the same. And then we're going to start convening these meetings. So if people want to be part of the solution, show up, and we'll start. If you guys want to sign up for our newsletter list, I think you can sign up back at the back table, and we'll just start pumping out these dates and people can show up if they want. And then there was another question. Was there anything uncovered about the lack of accessibility for individuals with wheelchairs or accommodations from landlords?
No, we did not specifically look at that, but as Tanya said, that is an increasing concern. I think a lot of the people that we talked to, like expressed that as a concern, but we didn't actually talk to anybody who is like using a wheelchair or has mobility issues, but I think it's a incoming problem that is definitely gonna, and that's where like money for housing renovation might be a great fund.
Okay, speak now or forever hold your peace. Anyone else? Can you come talk in the microphone? Or- Oh, take a bagel when you leave. Please take food.
Everybody, if that's okay. Thank you so much to Hannah and her team and to Wilder and everybody who made this possible. So often we talk about this housing issue and more so because we have to resettle more refugees, but we don't have the housing to be able to do that, and people need us to be resettling more. But now we have the numbers to be able to actually talk about it and actually have research-based information that we can back up our advocacy. So I just really appreciate this, and I hope we get more research around refugee areas like this. Thank you so much for all your passion and hard work in this.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Okay, yep, hold on, let me end this really quick. Oh, if I can figure out how to end this. Here we go.